You heard them before you saw them. A bicycle coming down the street at a speed that suggested purpose, and then the paper landing on the porch with a particular sound. Not loud, but precise. A thump if it hit flat, a slap if it caught the edge. The same sound, the same porch every afternoon. If it was raining, the paper came in a plastic bag. If it snowed, it still came. The Paperboy was one of the fixed points of the neighborhood, as reliable as the mailman and considerably less formal. He knew which houses tipped and which ones made him come back twice to collect. He knew the dogs. He knew the shortcuts. He knew which houses had the porch light on and which ones he had to find by memory. There was a canvas bag involved and a rubber band around each paper, even the particular weight of a full load versus the relief of an empty bag on the last stretch home. He knew the route the way you can only know something you have done 1,000 times in the dark. That figure is gone now, not just less common, functionally gone, replaced first by adults in cars and then by the question of whether the paper itself would still exist tomorrow. The Paperboy was not merely a delivery mechanism, he was a small piece of visible social infrastructure. A daily reminder that the neighborhood was connected and that somebody in it had agreed to get up early and make sure it stayed that way. When that disappeared, it disappeared quietly, the way things do when they are replaced rather than canceled. Nobody held a farewell, the bicycle just stopped coming. And the Paperboy, as Americans came to know him, was not born with the newspaper. He was invented during the Great Depression. Before the 1930s, the dominant figure in street-level news distribution was the newsie, the working-class kid who bought papers at wholesale and hawked them on corners, hollering headlines at passers-by. Newsies were largely poor, often exploited, and central to the street life of every major American city. But newspapers were struggling in the Depression, losing advertising revenue faster than they could cut costs. Publishers needed a cheaper way to build and hold circulation. The answer was home delivery, and the vehicle was a newly invented figure. The middle-class teenage Paperboy, not a street hustler but a junior businessman, managing a fixed route, collecting monthly subscriptions, and representing the paper directly to every household on his list. Circulation managers designed the routes, trained the boys in door-to-door subscription selling, and ran the whole operation with a care for appearances that the old newsy system never had. What they had created, without quite framing it this way, was a distribution model in which the final mile of every newspaper in America was covered by a child who had a personal relationship with everyone on his list. The model worked. It spread quickly and held for half a century. By World War II, the Paperboy was embedded deeply enough in American culture that the Treasury Department authorized Paperboys to sell war-saving stamps, and they became one of the most visible sales forces in the program. And the post office later issued a commemorative stamp celebrating newspaper carriers as standard bearers of free enterprise. As middle-class life turned increasingly suburban after the war, the route system grew with it. Every new subdivision was a new set of driveways and a new set of customers. Boys 13 and 14 years old managed their routes like small businesses, collecting payments door to door, recruiting new subscribers, and learning, in the process, what it felt like to be responsible for something that other people depended on. The newspaper was at the center of daily life, and the Paperboy was the last link in the chain that brought it there. Several things happened at once, and their effects compounded in ways that made the Paperboy's disappearance feel, in retrospect, almost inevitable. And the first was the death of the afternoon paper. Through most of the mid-20th century, many cities had two daily papers, a morning edition and an afternoon edition. The afternoon paper was the Paperboy's natural territory. Delivery after school, before dinner, along residential streets where the customers were already home. It suited the age and the schedule of a 12-year-old on a bicycle in a way that the 5 a.m. morning run never would. But afternoon papers declined as television news expanded. Cable news arrived in the 1980s and accelerated the decline further. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, afternoon papers were disappearing across the country, and the morning paper was becoming the only edition. Morning delivery required a car and an alarm set before dawn. No 12-year-old on a bicycle could do it. And the shift from afternoon to morning effectively ended child delivery by changing the conditions of the job in ways a child could not meet. Between 1980 and 1990, the number of adult newspaper carriers rose by more than 100%, while the number of youth carriers dropped by 60%. By the mid-1990s, newspapers in most cities had stopped using children for delivery entirely. The second was the collapse of newspaper circulation itself. Daily circulation had risen steadily from the 1940s through the early 1980s, peaking at just over 63 million weekday copies in 1984. Then it began a long, slow fall that accelerated into something closer to a collapse in the 2000s. Cable news took readers in the 1980s, and the internet took the classified advertising that had funded the industry. Classifieds that had made up roughly half of an average paper's advertising revenue were largely gone by the mid-2000s as free listing sites absorbed the market. The Great Recession of 2008 decimated display advertising. Readers who had let subscriptions lapse did not renew them. By 2022, combined print and digital daily circulation had fallen to roughly 21 million, a decline of 2/3 from the 1984 peak. Fewer subscribers meant fewer routes. Fewer routes meant fewer carriers of any age. The paperboy was always dependent on the health of the thing he delivered, and that thing was dying. The math of afternoon paper closures, morning delivery requirements, and collapsing circulation worked against the paperboy one variable at a time. No single decision eliminated him. The system around him simply changed until a child on a bicycle delivering newspapers to the same 30 houses every afternoon no longer fit anywhere within it. There is a useful footnote in the timing. In 1985, just as newspaper circulation had peaked and begun its decline, Atari released an arcade game called Paperboy, in which the player took the role of a carrier on a bicycle, throwing papers at houses while dodging dogs, construction workers, and rogue lawnmowers. The game was enormously popular and captured something about the job that everyone who had done it would have recognized: the difficulty of hitting the porch, the particular hazard of the dog, the feeling of the route as an obstacle course you ran every day. In that Atari thought to build an entire game around the figure in 1985 was a signal. By the time the game was in every arcade in America, the thing it depicted was already starting to disappear from the actual streets. What the paperboy had always represented beyond the logistics was a particular idea about how young people entered the world of work. The route was not just a job. It was a designed apprenticeship. The child who took one was responsible for the papers, for the money, for the complaints, and for the relationships with the people on the list. He learned what it felt like to be cold before sunrise and to keep going anyway. He learned which customers were kind and which ones held the door closed on collection day. He learned that the job existed independently of his mood, and that the people waiting for the paper did not care whether he felt like delivering it. Generations of Americans who went on to build businesses or manage other people traced something back to that route. Warren Buffett had one. So did Martin Luther King Jr. The Newspaper Carrier Hall of Fame, established in 1960, exists because enough people felt that what the route had given them was worth commemorating. The paperboy was the first job that millions of people ever had, and it was the first job that millions of people ever gave someone else. What the gig economy has since offered teenagers in its place: the algorithm-mediated delivery shift, the flexible hours, the work conducted without ever knowing a customer's name, is not quite the same apprenticeship, whatever else it may be. You can still find paper routes. These weekly community papers in small towns still rely on carriers, often adults. Some daily papers in mid-sized cities still offer routes, though the requirements now are a driver's license, a car, and a willingness to work before sunrise. The job exists, but it no longer resembles what it was. The child on the bicycle is gone. The afternoon delivery is gone. The monthly collection rounds where the carrier knocked on the door and waited while someone found their purse are gone. What remains is a contracted adult in a car working a route before most of the neighborhood wakes, which is a different thing entirely. Pull up a job listing for a newspaper carrier today and you will find that it requires a valid driver's license, reliable transportation, and the ability to begin your route by 4 in the morning. The paperboy is still out there, and technically in the adult carrier who loads the trunk before dawn and works the route without anyone watching or needing to know. But the version that mattered was the one everybody could see. The kid on the bicycle in the late afternoon working a neighborhood he knew by memory, responsible for something real before most people his age had been asked to be responsible for anything. It was not an easy job, and it was not a glamorous one. It was conducted in the cold and the rain, in the dark and the heat, on a schedule that did not accommodate excuses. It was built on the idea that a young person could take on a piece of the world and carry it, and that doing so would make them better at everything that came after. It never needed to be more than that. If this brought something back, let me know in the comments. Did you have a paper route? Or do you remember the customers, the collection days, the dogs, the feeling of finishing before anyone else on the street was awake? If you found this worth your time, subscribing helps me know there's interest in these topics.